And this is something we always find, a big chunk. And this big chunk is often what we call the one-hit wonders. So these are people who come to your website and go. Gone. Never to be seen again. And they create most of the noise. Yeah. The really interesting segments are generally the small ones that are actually quite difficult to spot in a traditional web analytics kind of approach. So what we often do these days now is immediately just get rid of these guys and then resegment. And then try and interpret the rest. So, for example, look at the differences in behavior. In this particular instance, we're just looking at all these different segments here. Some are more frequent visitors, and also some are happier than others. And we can begin to try and understand, well, what is it about these guys over here who are quite frequent visitors but not very happy? What is it about them? Why is it that we're getting that kind of profile? And we've got loads of data that sits behind it. So we can take any individual segment here and say, well, generally, how do they get to the site? What kind of search keywords do they use if they're using on-site search? Typically, what is the kind of content that they use? How important and valuable are they in terms of their core site behaviors? What do they look like? What is their demographic? If I've got this data and I can bring it in, it's so powerful. And we could back this up with numbers. This is not stuff coming out of thin air. To create things like profiles, personas. So we can bring them to life. So these are happy trackers. And does anybody know who's done a segmentation study? The hardest part is always A, coming up with the names, and B, finding the photographs to fit. It takes forever. So happy trackers. These people came to the Royal Mail website predominantly to use the track and trace kind of service. That was their journey. That's all they really did. And they were happy about it, which is why they're called happy trackers. It worked. But these people are completely different to these people. These people are interested in stamps. They're I can never say that. Stamp collectors. Their needs are completely different. Their behaviors are completely different. So the Royal Mail has to understand who these people are and make sure that the experience works for them. As I said yesterday, and I wrote it down, I can't remember who said it. We're not just delivering the customer experience, we're delivering many, many customer experiences. And that's why we need to understand, at this level of detail, who these people are. And these people were different to these people. This was a really interesting group. 2% only of the Royal Mail traffic, only 2%, but incredibly valuable. They were the guys who were using the site day in, day out, consume the widest breadth of information across all different parts of the site, mainly because they're involved in auctions. But they weren't buying anything. Now, why was that? Don't know. But we need to find out and do something about it. Maybe it's the way that the site was designed, et cetera, et cetera. So what we begin to do from these data mining approaches, no one went into this study saying, do you know, I think there's a cottage industrialist there. They will look like this. This came out of the data. The data said, these people exist. There's a core of them. It's only 2% of your traffic, but they exist. They're distinct, and we interpreted them in terms of all the other data to say who they were, and importantly, what can be done about that. So what eventually, this kind of approach can deliver is a much more customer-centric way of thinking, as Jim was saying yesterday. So we begin to understand, who actually visits the site. We can put a name to them. We can put a face to them. We can describe them. We can talk about their behaviors. We can talk about their satisfaction. We can talk about their attitudes. And importantly, we can understand where they're likely to go. So we can either design the experience better, we can target them differently, we can enhance their experience. So that's one example. The second example is slightly different. And it's about using another technique, which I happen to like, called propensity modeling. The technique is something called using decision trees. And that's a sort of a generic term for a whole family of different algorithms. In this particular example, we're working with an insurance company. And typical web analytics kind of view of the world, we're basically looking at people who come to the website and then to see whether they actually buy an insurance policy on the website or not. But the trouble with insurance, and as there is indeed a lot of markets, a lot of channels, is that it ain't always like that. And actually what they understood and were actually in a position to measure was people who actually visited the website, started the application process, but actually ended up leaking into the call center. And in fact, for every 3 policies they sold online, they sold 1 that started online and ended up offline in the call center. Why? Why were people coming online and then actually ending up drifting offline? Because in a sense, this is a cost they would rather not have. Can't necessarily avoid it all the time, but are there ways that we can manage that? What is it about them? So what factors are actually influencing people to come offline? So what we did is we created, again, a data set based on a number of different sources, customer data, web data, et cetera, and actually said, we want to understand whether people essentially use what they call the pure channel, which is online to online, or were mixed, which was online to offline. And we created and brought together a whole bunch of different possible reasons or predictive variables which would explain or would help explain why people were going offline. And there's a whole bunch of them, such as the policy type, their age, their gender, the value of the premium that they were looking for, etc., and a whole bunch, that goes all the way down here. Lots, again, of data. And what decision trees allow you to do is to say, right, let's take all this stuff here, and as an analyst, I could spend a few days looking through all these variables, trying to work out which one seems to be influencing the one I'm interested in the most. Or I can take these variables and I can put them into a decision tree analysis and produce pretty charts, which is far better, far more fun. So let's take, for example, the top level. So we know that around 75% of policies sold ended up as pure and 25% as mixed. What the analysis then told me was that all the variables that I was looking at, the most important one, the most predictive one of whether someone would stay online or eventually go offline was the type of policy they were buying. That was the most predictive variable. And if they were looking and interested in buying policy C, then that was the one where people were more likely to be going offline. Why? Don't know. But actually, what we did find out subsequently was that it was to do with the way that that policy was being presented on the website. And the important thing is you can take this down to the next level and say, okay, what's the next most important thing? Well, even amongst those people who are looking to buy policy C, where on the whole 31% of them ended up going offline, the older they were, the more likely it was that they would end up calling the call center. And as I say, it's to do with the type of policy and the way that it's actually being explained in the application process that actually made it difficult, perhaps, for people to really understand what it is they were buying. And perhaps there's just an age thing going on here, that people were less comfortable than actually going ahead with purchasing online, and they wanted to pick up the phone and talk to someone. What the clients actually did about this is they revisited all the copy and the explanation and the wording around this one specific policy that they had online and changed it. And we reran the analysis about 6 months later, and this was no longer the most important predictive variable that was actually driving. So they changed it. But the thing is, again, you can also then turn it on its head. Who are the people who are most likely to buy online? Well, these people here are the most buying policy A, are most likely to actually complete online. And actually, if they're in this age group here, 35 to 65, then they're actually the most likely to buy online. And actually, you can take it down to the next stage to say, actually, if their policy value was under £250, around about $400, then that was actually 87% of them would be more likely to complete online. So in terms of targeting, I have a very distinct profile now of people who should be the lowest people with cost to serve or to cost to acquire in terms of online acquisition. And you can see it's not necessarily a linear thing, because actually the younger they were, the more likely they would end up calling the call center again. And that's because of the whole way that the risk was worked. They actually didn't want particularly young people in terms of car insurance, so they made it harder for them to buy. So again, this is a technique which helps just to cut through the noise, to extract the key signals. I could have spent maybe 3-4 days doing cross-tabulations and analysis in Excel or whatever, trying to understand this. But by running a few routines, checking the results, making sure they made sense, we came up with something which is far more insightful in a fraction of the time. So, where are we? I think, as we all know, that the volumes and complexity of the data, and therefore, in a sense, our jobs, is increasing all the time. Therefore, we need to change the rules a little bit. We need to look for new tools in the toolbox and deploy them as well we can. And in many cases, we're already doing this. We're doing it operationally in things like our testing systems, our targeting systems. But also, we need it as an insight tool, as an analyst tool as well. Because at the end of the day, people like to know why. Why is this stuff happening? These techniques, and I've really just scratched the surface today, can really, really help cut through the noise. But it's not without its challenges. Do not underestimate the amount of effort that can be involved in just getting the data into the right shape, getting it from one place to another. We're talking large volumes here. We also need to have some understanding of the tools that we're using and actually using the right tool for the right job. But before you go into this, please, please, ask yourself, if you get the answer, what are you going to do about it? Because insight without action has no value. And with that, I thank you for your kind attention.